Welcome, I'm Rabbi Phil Bressler of Beit Am in Corvallis, Oregon. This is the daily summary video for the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch Yomi Daily Halakha Learning Project, covering the passage from Siman 143 Seif 10 to Siman 143 Seif 18. You can find links to the Hebrew and English text of this passage and to the calendar of upcoming passages in this video's description. Continuing talking about honoring one's father and mother. Remember, we're flattening the gender roles here, so honoring parents is the mitzvah in question. The primary way that hierarchy of Jewish values is determined is through the halachic process of taking two values and basically slamming them into each other and see what wins out. So it's good to name what we care about, but when the rubber meets the road, what are you going to do? So we can see this process in action as the mitzvah of honoring one's parents collides with other values and other obligations. So if your parent transgresses a devar Torah, that is a word of Torah, not sure if we're limiting this just to the don'ts, the negative mitzvot in Torah, or if this holds for any case where you feel your parent isn't living up to the standards set before them. Don't say, you transgressed such and such. Ask it as a question. Isn't such and such written in the Torah? The idea being that they'll come to the understanding that they've made a mistake themselves and act to correct it. There's plenty of situations in life, I think, where direct callouts are warranted, but as a matter of delicacy or maybe diplomacy, as a matter of upholding someone else's honor, it's good to be tactful in this way. Now here we're really getting to a crux. If your parent tells you to transgress somehow, on the one hand, we're obligated to follow our parents' instructions, and on the other hand, we're obligated to follow the mitzvot. So what do? The Kitzur says, don't obey. You uphold the religious obligations. Mitzvot win out over other mitzvot win out over honoring one's father and mother by obeying their commands. If you're directed by your parent not to speak to someone and not to forgive them for some slight done to you or maybe to them, but you want to reconcile, you actually don't obey your parents. Reconciliation and making peace is a Jewish value, and that takes precedence over honoring parents by obeying them as well. There are other limitations on our duty to obey our parents. If you want to go study in a particular school for the sake of your own advancement, but your parent disapproves, you don't have to obey them. Kitzur here is explicit and says, Talmud Torah gadol mi kibud av va'em, so learning Torah is greater than the precept of honoring parents. If you want to get married but your parent disapproves, you don't have to obey them. I'm not going to validate this idea here that a married woman no longer has to honor parents because of devotion to her husband and can only do that without her husband's consent. I think that's pretty gross. Various fail cases here in case you want to know what happens if you don't honor your parents. It's not just in the case where there's not just a failure to honor them, but actually actively disgracing your parents by word or by action. This is not just failing to live up to the positive mitzvah of honoring one's parents, but it in fact invites a specific curse. Also, don't do medicine on your parents. Basically, sometimes healing is done by means of wounding. Like, for example, removing a splinter could, involves making someone bleed. There's reference again here to bloodletting, which obviously we don't do, but this is, as far as I know, common medical practice even today is not to get involved because of the conflict of interest. If you're a physician, don't operate on your parents, for example, unless it's really urgent. Seif number 16 is all too real for so many folks that I know. That's the case of a parent's mental state deteriorating. Children are still fully obligated to their parents throughout decline, through illness or old age. And at the same time, the Kitzur leaves open the possibility that it may be too much, and delegating care to others, if it's in everyone's best interest, is permitted. I appreciate this angle kind of from the parent's perspective to wrap up our section today. If you're the parent, don't be overly demanding of honor from your kids. If you insist on treating their efforts as dishonorable to you, then you're basically just causing them to sin. Don't hit your grown-up son. There's something else gross here in that seems to imply that it's permissible to hit a child. But the last line here gives some rationale that illuminates what this is all about, which is that line, don't place a stumbling block before the blind. So this line from Leviticus chapter 19 is read not just as prohibiting that specific act of cruelty, but actually as forbidding anything that's going to set someone else up for failure or set them up to come to harm or to commit a transgression somehow. So here the assumption seems to be that a grown-up is going to instinctively hit back at someone who hits them. And so hitting a grown-up son, therefore, sets them up to transgress by hitting back at their own parent and thereby violating Kibud Av Va'em, honoring their parents. That's all for today. As always, our learning is dedicated to Rabbi Shlomo Gansfried, the author of the Kitzur, and the historic Jewish community of Uzhhorod, Ukraine. See you tomorrow.